Just like everybody else, you probably want to know how to write more and how to write faster. Today, I've got about 8 tips that I try to implement and use to help myself write more, but also some stuff that I've combed from other writers and off the internet that people have claimed has helped them write more and write faster. Right out of the gate, this is kind of my go-to and the thing that actually helps me write the fastest and write the most, or at least feel as if I'm writing faster. And that is manufacturing stress. This is kind of a weird one, to be totally honest. But for whatever reason, this has made me or has led to some of the most productive writing sessions that I've had. Early in my day as a younger writer or an earlier writer, a lot of the times, if I knew I had homework or classwork or an exam I had to study for whatever reason, I was able to churn out a lot more words and be a lot more productive in those writing sessions. Now, when I say productive, though, I don't necessarily mean that those words or what I wrote was the cleanest or the best, but from a quantity standpoint, I definitely was spending the most time behind the keys and also writing. Something that can be a bit helpful or break up sort of the stress that is this manufactured stress is giving yourself some reward systems along the way. Hitting kind of fake deadlines or even real deadlines might be a way to manufacture this kind of stress or a sense of urgency. And if you don't necessarily like having deadlines or find it hard to hold yourself accountable to write to a deadline, something else that you can do is give yourself smaller windows of time to actually be writing. Clip yourself on either the front end or the back end of your writing sessions and fill them with either real work that you might have to get done and turn in, whether that's school or professional, or even maybe social and health related stuff, such as seeing friends or even workouts. Number 2 on the list is actually one that I think was one of the first sort of aha moments that I had to help me write more and actually be a better writer in general. And that was understanding what times are best for me to write, or understanding when it is best for you to write. And this sort of becomes 4 sort of subcategories under that. And that is the environment that you write in, the time of day that you might be writing, the atmosphere that you write in, and as well, the accountability that you hold yourself to. When it comes to environment, sometimes recognizing if you are easily distracted by clutter or that you need to break up where you're at, or even sometimes it's that you are trying to write where you do other things in your life. A lot of times you hear other writers talk about how you really shouldn't write while you're in bed or work where you sleep. And there's a lot of psychological factors that go into that I don't necessarily know the science behind, but I know others have spoken about the need to separate some of these different areas that we do certain things in our life. As far as time goes, this was probably the biggest and most revolutionary part of my earlier writing journey. And that was kind of recognizing when I was the most productive as well as the most creative. Some people are night owls and can stay up into the wee ends of the night working and writing and being productive, while others are early morning risers. Some people fit somewhere in between, but usually trying to recognize and be a little reflective and try to figure out when you are most creative while also being the most productive. For me, I'm more of an early morning riser and writer, but that was a lot of the times due to necessity because of my past job. But now I tend to have a routine where I'm writing about the same time every day. And as far as atmosphere goes, sometimes we lump this with environment, but I like to think of atmosphere as the other people or lack of people around you when you're writing. Sometimes it's really beneficial to work and write on your own or in total silence with no music or anything. Other times people like to include music or even write in the company of other people. For some, writing in a cafe or even outside where there might be some background noise is too much of a distraction. Whereas for other people, it sort of creates a bit of a white noise and is actually very soothing. The big thing is try something different, see what works for you, and try to incorporate that or break up your writing sessions with whatever sort of atmosphere is beneficial to you. And then in addition to that, with accountability, sometimes when you are in the presence of others, whether it's meeting some friends or even a writing group once a week, or it can even be going and joining a write-in live stream or something. Either way, of these kind of 4 categories, you can start to create the best setting for your writing to come out in. If you've gotten value out of some of these tips, please consider liking and subscribing, as it's a good way to help out the channel, but also let me know that you are getting value out of these videos. Number 3 on our list kind of touches on some of the ones earlier and will kind of touch on ones we have later, but that is to set goals. This can be either word count goals, time limits that you are actually sitting there writing, milestones, whether that's completing chapters, scenes, certain parts of your outline, and anything else that might act as a reward system for you to keep writing. Sometimes achieving many small things can make achieving a larger thing much more attainable. A lot of the times we see an entire completed manuscript or novel as being the only goal. And as we start to write and as we get to the monotony or the day-to-day sort of grind of it, it can feel like that goal is almost unattainable. However, if we think about breaking up this big goal into smaller goals such as chapters, scenes, it becomes a lot easier to attain and we can see the light at the end of that tunnel a lot sooner. Number 4 might fit into the earlier one on our list about atmosphere, but this is a little bit different, and that is to eliminate distractions. This is kind of a no-brainer, but we need to know what actually distracts us. For some people, our phone is not a distraction. It can be buzzing and we can ignore it as it continues to go off, despite who might be calling or texting or whatever notifications we might be getting. The same thing goes for clutter. Sometimes clutter can be very distracting, and either removing ourselves from the clutter or cleaning up around us will actually help us become more productive and more creative. And then also, which kind of goes into atmosphere, but knowing the company around us. If we know that having people over, or if we know that going out and trying to write at a coffee shop or something is going to distract us, then we should probably do our best to either change certain locations and volumes of that distraction or eliminate it altogether. Number 5 is starting to get into a little more technical, and that is to not edit as you write. I think this is a mistake that both new and established and all sorts of writers in between make. Usually I find that this comes off the back of finishing or even just being on your first draft, or maybe even going into your second draft of your novel. The first book that I actually wrote and ended up shelving for the time being was one that took way longer than it should have to write, mostly because of this very reason. As I was writing, I was constantly going back and editing and even just adjusting stuff on a sentence level, not necessarily on a scene level. Editing and actually writing are 2 very different parts of our brains that we are employing. And we should try to separate our writing sessions from our editing sessions, as they can be very distracting and trying to pull that part of our brain in different directions. Now, if you need to go back and reread what you wrote yesterday or something like that, or the day prior, or you need to get familiarized with some of where your story's at, if you took some time off, go back and reread it. And if you need to edit certain parts of that, edit certain parts of that. This isn't a hard and fast rule, but if we find that we are spending our entire writing session or our entire time that we dedicated to writing to editing, then we usually are falling into this trap. Similarly, if we are procrastinating actually writing maybe a hard scene or a scene that we aren't really sure how we need it to be written yet, and we are constantly editing the stuff before or editing stuff after, we're never addressing what the actual problem is or the actual problem scene is, that can also be a sign that we are avoiding that scene and that we should, again, try to delineate and break up our editing voice and actually get to writing. Number 6 on our list is to come prepared. And this is one that I have actually grown into appreciating a lot more than usual. When I first started out writing, I definitely considered myself a pantser. I would always say that inspiration was like jet fuel, and if I didn't have that inspiration, I was running on E pretty much the entire time. But I think that what we can do to help facilitate our inspiration is to actually come prepared to our writing sessions. And prepared can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different writers. For one, it might be having an outline. And this is something that I've definitely started to adopt a lot more, or at least a rough outline and even storyboarding some concepts. Another big thing too is that if we are feeling particularly inspired or inclined or have a good understanding of a certain scene, but it may not be the scene that we anticipated on writing during that writing session, especially if we're writing linearly, write the scene that is coming to you, or at least start getting the general idea or some notes down about it. It's important to make sure that we are writing first and foremost the stuff that is coming easiest to us about the story, because we don't want to have a good idea or have a good concept and wait to write it and then come back later and realize that we can't remember it or something else came up and now we aren't sure if we should rewrite a bunch of stuff before for that scene. Sometimes writing those scenes, the ones that may not necessarily fit but feel like you need to put them on the page, it's better to put that on the page and then see if it really fits into your story and see if it's better idea than it is actually a written concept. But to become prepared to a writing session, we really should have some sort of outline or at least some notes with us. Sometimes we can get away with just free writing and writing and writing and writing, but up to a certain point, we kind of need to know where the story's going to go. Day 1, 2, 3, and 4 might be great. We might be writing and free writing and have no problem. But by the time we get to day 5, 6, 7, 8, if we're stuck because we've written ourselves into a corner, then if we maybe would have had some sort of plan beforehand or an idea of where the story was going, that could have helped with those days and all of the days being as productive as they could be. And for 7, this one is a little more abstract and is a little bit niche, but we should approach every writing session knowing what we want to accomplish during that writing session. And this definitely feeds back into being prepared. Part of it, we may want to have an outline so that we know what it is that we're trying to write that day. But at the minimum, if we've at least thought about the things that we want to write or that we need to write, then it will be a lot easier to approach not just the writing session in front of us, but the ones thereafter. And when it comes to our outlines, we don't always need to have it be the cleanest, most aesthetically pleasing and detailed outline. An outline can look and mean many different things for many different writers. An outline could quite literally just be 3 bullet points: where we want the story to start, the climax, or what we want to happen in the middle, and then where we want it to end. As long as there's some sort of plan or we know the steps we want to take during a writing session or for a project, that will end up writing more and being more productive as a writer. And part 8 is to be part of a writing community. This is something that I, again, didn't necessarily see the total value in, and actually was a bit more of a lurker in a bunch of different communities. But even in doing those things, and even in never necessarily interacting, but being present or influenced by a community, you actually are a part of that community. And when we become part of a community or a writing community, whether that's one other person or a whole host of people, we are forced to think about other stories than our own. And this can be incredibly beneficial. It's the same actual benefit of reading and why we should read to help improve our writing. When we read, we are understanding stories that have made it. Well, when we're part of a community and we're working with peers, or we're listening to peers, or we're seeing other people's projects and works, we aren't necessarily seeing the works that have made it, but the works that are in progress. And if you are part of a community long enough and you see your peers or other colleagues moving through that process, it can be incredibly beneficial to see the things that they changed, things they didn't change, the things that other people are suggesting. These sorts of things are really hard to find on their own and can't really be given or shown even in a video like this or in a classroom. However, in a group of people or in a community, you can see these changes and you can see other writers develop and improve. And they can give you feedback and help you develop and improve. It also helps you with receiving and giving feedback and criticism. This is something that I have always spoken about when it comes to being a writer. Being a writer is all about knowing how to give and how to get criticism and feedback, and then how to and what to do with that criticism and feedback. When we are part of a community, we're forced to improve our bedside manners, and we learn firsthand that not all criticism and critique is made equal, and that we don't have to implement everybody's criticism and critique. But also being part of a community feeds back into some of the others on this list, most notably the accountability of it. Knowing that you're not necessarily on an island and understanding what I usually advocate for, being writing is inherently collaborative. We might feel like we are on an island writing by ourselves, but that is rarely the case. There's readers, they interact with our work. There's editors, they interact with our work. And then there's also our peers and the different writing groups or communities that might be a part of, which will interact with our work. Those are my 8 tips on how to write more and in general be a more productive and efficient writer. A lot of these might have sounded like I was advocating for not being a pantser and being an outliner, but I that's not necessarily what I'm trying to say. I think every writer is on some sort of level a degree of plotter and a degree of pantser. But I think that what we do and how we organize our thoughts is important when we approach our writing. But let me know what you're wrestling with. Do you have any tips that you use to help yourself be a more productive writer or to write more? Let me know in the comments down below. That's all to say. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.